It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind of morning that makes you feel like you've slipped into a painting. The water shimmered with gold streaks from the early sun, a soft breeze ruffled the trees, and I had just poured myself a mug of coffee, ready to sit on my dock and forget the world for a while. That's when I saw them, bright, obnoxious, and utterly unnecessary, HOA members-only signs staring at me like they had some divine authority over my life. I froze mid-sip, the hot coffee suddenly tasting like betrayal. My dock, which I had spent countless weekends fixing, maintaining, and decorating with a little care, a little love, and a lot of sweat. And now, according to the HOA, it belonged to some secret club I had never joined, never applied for, and frankly, didn't want to join. I leaned over the railing for a closer look, running my hand along the weathered wood as if it could reassure me that I hadn't gone insane. No, it was definitely there, stapled crookedly, almost laughing at me. Members only, it read in bold, orange letters. I blinked. Members only? Did my dock suddenly get a personality and decide it wanted exclusive access? I muttered to myself. At first, I thought maybe it was a prank. Maybe the neighborhood kids had taken up sign-making as a hobby. But then I saw the second one. And the third. By the time I counted 5 lined up like sentries, I realized it wasn't a joke. The HOA had officially claimed control over my dock. My peaceful, sacred Saturday morning had been hijacked by bureaucracy. I paced along the dock, coffee in hand, letting the ridiculousness of it sink in. How did a group of middle-aged volunteers get the idea that they could dictate access to my personal waterfront? Did they picture me paying dues to enjoy my own property? The thought alone made me snort coffee through my nose. Literally, a small, bitter laugh escaped me and I shook my head. This was absurd, but the absurdity only fueled a spark of excitement deep inside. I could have reacted angrily, called the HOA immediately, or written an indignant email filled with exclamation marks and passive-aggressive threats. But instead, I did what I always do when facing a challenge. I observed, I planned, and I let my imagination run wild. I walked slowly along the edge of the water, watching my dock from every angle. The signs were small, almost laughably so against the expanse of my property, yet they carried a weight far beyond their size. They were symbols of control, rules imposed where they didn't belong. And I knew right then that I wasn't going to let them stand. As I stared out at the calm lake, a mischievous thought crept in. What if I didn't just remove the signs? What if I transformed the entire dock into something entirely my own? A private marina, perhaps, where the HOA couldn't touch me, couldn't intimidate me, and certainly couldn't claim superiority. The idea made my heart race. I could almost see it, small boats tied neatly along the sides, floating lights casting a warm glow on the water, a little welcome to my marina sign I could hang with pride. My dock would no longer be a passive symbol of relaxation, it would be a statement. And best of all, it would be done overnight without anyone having a chance to stop me. I poured the rest of my coffee into the mug, staring at the water, letting the ripples mirror the whirlwind of ideas forming in my head. There was no yelling, no confrontation yet, just a quiet thrill, a sense of plotting that made me feel more alive than I had in weeks. Every screw I'd ever hammered, every board I'd ever sanded suddenly felt like preparation for this moment. I picked up a small buoy that had been floating near the dock, rolling it between my hands like a conspiratorial prop. They think they own this, I muttered, but they don't even know what they're dealing with. A slow grin spread across my face. It wasn't just about a dock anymore. It was about creativity, strategy, and the delicious satisfaction of turning the tables on people who thought rules gave them power over others. By the time I stepped off the dock and back onto my yard, I had already begun sketching plans in my mind. Tools, materials, lights, boats, everything had a purpose. And as the sun climbed higher, casting golden streaks across the water, I knew one thing for certain. By the next morning, my dock wouldn't just be mine, it would be untouchable. And the HOA, well, they were about to learn that sometimes taking control doesn't require permission. It requires imagination, patience, and a little bit of audacity. After staring at those ridiculous members-only signs for what felt like an eternity, I realized I couldn't just act on impulse. Sure, I could have marched up to the HOA office waving my coffee mug like a weapon, but I've learned the hard way that planning beats rage every single time. If I wanted to reclaim my dock and make it untouchable, I needed to understand exactly what rules I was up against. So I grabbed the HOA bylaws, a thick binder that smelled faintly of old paper and misplaced authority, and settled on my dock like a general surveying the battlefield. Every page I turned was a mix of boredom, frustration, and amusement. I mean, half of it was about the exact height of garden hedges, mailbox colors, and how many times you could repaint your front door without a permit. The other half seemed written purely to assert control over things nobody cared about. And then, buried somewhere between the section on lawn ornaments and pet restrictions, I found it, the section on the docks. My dock, according to the bylaws, it technically fell under community property. That's when I realized the HOA had been banking on technicalities, hoping I wouldn't dig into the fine print. I read and reread it, paragraphs twisted around ambiguous words like reasonable access and shared use. One sentence made my heart race. If you had maintained the dock for more than 20 years and it was in continuous private use, the HOA couldn't enforce membership restrictions without a formal vote. I leaned back on my dock, letting the morning sun warm my face, a slow grin spreading across my lips. The whole time, the HOA had thought they were clever. They thought they could intimidate me with signs and regulations. But they hadn't considered one thing: I was not only familiar with the rules, they were about to become my weapon. It was a beautiful feeling, realizing that power isn't always in the signs you post or the rules you write, it's in understanding them better than anyone else. And that's when the idea hit me. If they were going to claim control, I'd show them exactly what private really meant. And I wouldn't just remove their signs, I would transform my dock into something completely untouchable. I spent the next hour packing back and forth, running scenarios in my head. Could I expand the dock slightly without violating zoning? Could I add floating lights to make it look like a private marina? What about boats tied along the sides, ropes neatly coiled, and a few inflatable buoys for flair? Every idea made my pulse quicken. By the end, I wasn't just imagining a dock, I was imagining a statement, a clear message that the HOA's control ended where my creativity began. Humor, of course, kept sneaking in. I imagined the HOA president arriving one morning, clipboard in hand, and seeing my dock transformed into a miniature marina. Their expression would go from smug authority to pure confusion in less than a second. I laughed aloud just thinking about it. That laugh bounced across the water, startling a duck or two, but I didn't care. The absurdity of the situation made the plan even sweeter. By midday, I decided it was time to prepare my arsenal. Not guns or weapons, just tools, materials, and ingenuity. I gathered old ropes, buoys, small boats I'd been storing, a few extra planks, and even a string of waterproof lights. I stacked them neatly in my yard, packing around them like a commander examining his supplies before a midnight operation. Every item had a purpose, every knot and board carefully considered. Neighbors walked past, some glancing curiously, others trying to avoid eye contact. I waved cheerfully, but I could feel the suspense building. Somewhere nearby, the HOA was probably plotting their next move, blissfully unaware that I had already planned mine. As the afternoon sun began to dip, I leaned against a tree and watched the dock. It looked innocent, calm, and ordinary, yet I knew what it would become. I didn't just see wood and water, I saw potential. By tonight, with a little patience and creativity, my dock would no longer be a place for passive relaxation, it would be a symbol. A symbol of audacity, cleverness, and quiet rebellion. And as I sipped the last of my coffee, I promised myself one thing: the HOA wouldn't know what hit them. They had underestimated me, assumed I'd be intimidated, assumed I would comply. They hadn't realized that sometimes the best response isn't confrontation. Sometimes it's patience, research, and a plan so brilliant that when it's executed, no one can argue with the result. By the time I packed up the bylaws and glanced back at the lake, I knew one thing: tonight the dock would change forever. And by tomorrow morning, the HOA would have to face the consequences. By the time the sun had started its slow descent, painting the lake in golden and pink hues, I knew it was time to get serious. Planning was one thing, reading bylaws was another, but execution was everything. If this dock was going to be transformed into my private marina, I needed the right tools, the right materials, and a little patience. And maybe a touch of audacity. I started with a trip to my garage, where I had been storing bits and pieces for projects that never quite got finished. Old dock planks stacked neatly in the corner, ropes coiled like soldiers at attention, and a couple of small inflatable buoys that had long since outlived their beach trips. Each item I pulled out made me grin. It wasn't just junk, it was the foundation of my little rebellion. Next came the boats. I have a small rowboat, a kayak, and an inflatable paddleboard, nothing fancy but enough to make a visual impact. I dragged them one by one toward the dock, testing the water for stability. I imagined how the HOA president would react, trying to wrap their heads around the sight of boats tied up neatly along the dock where only hours ago there had been nothing but a few stray fishing poles. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. The mental image alone was worth the effort. Ropes and cleats were next on my list. I wrapped, tied, and retied, making sure everything was secure. The dock would need to hold boats overnight, and if the HOA came snooping, I wanted it to look intentional, professional, and completely untouchable. My hands were rough and sticky from sap and rope fibers, but the satisfaction made every scrape and scratch worth it. Humor kept creeping in despite the suspense. I imagined the HOA president trying to enforce members only while slipping on wet ropes, tripping over a buoy, and eventually surrendering to the sheer audacity of it all. I could hear their exasperated muttering now. This wasn't in the bylaws, what is this? It made me chuckle, but I had to keep moving. My dock transformation wasn't going to finish itself. I set up small solar-powered lights along the edges of the dock. They were subtle, not too flashy, just enough to create a warm glow at night. The idea wasn't just aesthetic, it was psychological. The glow would make it clear that this space had been claimed, maintained, and loved. A warning without words: this is private and you're looking at it at your own risk. By late afternoon, I had everything ready. The materials were at the dock, the plan was clear, and I felt a thrill that's hard to describe. It was a mix of excitement, nervousness, and that delicious adrenaline that comes from knowing you're about to execute a plan no one saw coming. Every step I took, every item I placed, was calculated to maximize impact and minimize risk. Of course, tension was never far behind. Every creak of the dock under my weight, every rustle in the bushes had me pausing. Was it a neighbor, or worse, a HOA member doing reconnaissance? I held my breath, but no one appeared. The suspense was exhilarating, sharpening my senses in a way only impending mischief can. I spent a moment looking out at the water, imagining the final result. Boats tied in perfect symmetry, ropes coiled, lights reflecting off the ripples, and a small "Welcome to my Marina" sign swinging gently in the breeze. It was audacious, bold, and undeniably mine. I could almost see the confusion on the faces of anyone who dared to approach. They would come expecting rules, authority, and control, but find a dock completely transformed where every inch bore my mark. Neighbors wandered past, curious but careful. One old man gave me a suspicious look as I carried a stack of planks, and I waved, pretending nothing unusual was happening. In my mind, I imagined a scenario: HOA members arriving at dawn, clipboard in hand, ready to assert dominance, and finding a dock that had already declared independence. The mental image made me grin. By the time dusk fell, the dock was ready for the next phase, the transformation itself. The materials were in place, the plan was rehearsed, and my imagination had done more than half the work. All that remained was to execute. I stepped back, hands on hips, surveying my little arsenal. Every rope, plank, boat, and light had a purpose. Every choice had been deliberate. And as the last rays of sun disappeared behind the trees, I knew one thing: tonight the dock would change forever. By tomorrow morning, the HOA would have to face the consequences of underestimating me. With the night ahead and the water reflecting the first stars, I felt a surge of anticipation. This wasn't just about boats and planks. It was about proving that audacity, preparation, and a little bit of humor could turn even the most ridiculous confrontation into a masterpiece. Tonight, the dock would no longer be just a dock. It would be my statement, my private marina, my victory. Night fell like a velvet curtain, wrapping the lake in shadows and the quiet hum of crickets. Most people were tucked in their homes, oblivious to what was about to unfold on my dock. I, on the other hand, felt the adrenaline kick in. This was it, the moment my plan would finally take shape. I stepped outside, moving like a shadow along the grassy path to the dock. Moonlight danced on the water, reflecting off the few remaining ripples from the day's breeze. I carried my first load of materials: planks, ropes, lights, balancing them carefully so as not to make a sound. Every creak of the dock under my weight made me pause, heart thumping, imagining the HOA president sneaking around and catching me in the act. The thought made me grin. They didn't know what was coming. I started with the boats. The rowboat first, sliding it carefully into the water, checking the ropes and ensuring it wouldn't drift away. Then came the kayak, followed by the inflatable paddleboard. I tied each one with precision, making sure the arrangement looked neat and intentional. There was a rhythm to it, a quiet satisfaction that only comes when a long-planned idea starts to materialize. Next came the planks. I extended the dock slightly, adding a small floating platform on one side to make room for more boats. Each hammer strike was measured, each screw deliberate. I worked with quiet intensity, the only sounds the occasional splash of water or the clink of metal against wood. Humor occasionally bubbled up. I imagined the HOA president stumbling across this floating extension in the middle of the night, muttering about bylaws and reasonable use, completely bewildered. The lights were next. I strung small, waterproof solar-powered lights along the edges of the dock, testing each one to make sure they cast just enough glow on the water. Not too flashy, this wasn't a party dock, this was a statement. And a subtle one at that: my dock, my rules, my marina. The gentle illumination made the water shimmer, and I couldn't help but step back and admire the effect. Even in the dark, the dock looked alive, purposeful, untouchable. There were moments of tension, of course. A branch snapped somewhere nearby, sending me ducking behind a post. My heart skipped a beat, thinking it might be a neighbor or worse, the HOA, but it was just a raccoon, probably wondering what I was doing in the middle of the night with boats, ropes, and solar lights. I laughed quietly to myself, shaking off the nervous energy. Every creak, every splash only added to the suspense. I tied the last buoy to a corner post and adjusted its position so it bobbed gently with the water, giving the dock a polished, professional look. I added a few small touches, a rope ladder here, a coiled rope there, enough to make it look like someone who knew exactly what they were doing had curated this space. And in my mind, I could already hear the HOA president's voice. This wasn't in the bylaws, this, what is this? I smirked, knowing that the mental image alone would make tomorrow all the sweeter. By the time I finished, the dock had been completely transformed. It wasn't just a dock anymore, it was a private marina. Boats tied neatly, ropes coiled, lights casting a soft glow on the water. Even in the dark, the structure radiated order and intention. Every plank, every rope, every little buoy screamed ownership, but in a way the HOA could never argue with. I stepped back and admired my work from the edge of the water, hands on hips, heart pounding with a mix of exhaustion and excitement. The moon reflected perfectly off the lake, casting the dock in a magical light, almost theatrical. This wasn't just a project anymore. This was a victory waiting to be discovered at dawn. I leaned against the railing, sipping water, thinking about how the next morning would unfold. The HOA would arrive, expecting a simple members-only enforcement scenario, and instead they'd find a dock completely transformed. They would see boats, lights, floating platforms, and a sign that I hadn't even put up yet, "Welcome to my marina." And I could hardly wait. Tonight, the dock was mine. By morning, the lake would belong to the imagination, creativity, and audacity that I had poured into every plank and rope. The HOA didn't stand a chance, not because I had legalese or authority, but because I had something far more powerful: preparation, execution, and the element of surprise. With one last glance, I packed away the remaining tools, leaving the dock spotless and ready for the morning reveal. I walked back to the house, feeling a rush of anticipation, knowing that the next chapter of this story would be unforgettable. Morning came with a soft pink glow over the lake, and with it, the calm I had enjoyed for so many weekends seemed almost fragile. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, ready to greet another peaceful day, but nothing about this morning would be peaceful. As I approached the dock, I noticed a small crowd had gathered at the edge of my property. HOA members, obviously startled and confused, were standing in awkward clusters, clutching clipboards and muttering under their breaths. They looked like kids caught in a candy store they weren't allowed to enter. Their eyes were glued to the dock, and honestly, I couldn't blame them. The transformation was complete. Boats floated neatly along the sides, ropes coiled in perfect symmetry, small solar lights glimmering softly, and a tiny "Welcome to my marina" sign swaying gently in the breeze. The floating platform I had added extended the dock, giving it a professional, intentional look. It was subtle, elegant, and undeniably mine. The absurdity of it all hit me, and I couldn't stop myself from chuckling. The HOA president finally stepped forward, a mixture of outrage and disbelief painted across their face. "You can't do this," they exclaimed, voice wavering somewhere between anger and incomprehension. "This dock is community property. You're violating the rules." I took a slow sip of coffee and leaned casually against the railing, letting the morning sun warm my back. "Oh," I said, letting the word hang in the air just long enough to make them uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, which part of the bylaws are we talking about again?" They opened their clipboard and started flipping through pages, muttering phrases like shared use, reasonable access, and membership requirements. I nodded along politely, pretending to follow, but inside I was grinning like a kid who had just set the ultimate trap. "You can't just," the president started again, but I interrupted, calm and collected. "I read the bylaws last night," I said, holding up the binder they had so proudly printed. "It seems that as long as I maintain the dock and have been using it consistently for decades, I have rights to this property, including improvements." The words seemed to hit like a splash of cold water. I could see their minds spinning, trying to find a loophole, a rule, anything that could stop me, but I had done my homework. Every clause, every fine print, every ambiguous sentence had been studied, noted, and weaponized in my favor. The rest of the HOA members stood frozen, whispering among themselves, glancing nervously at the boats and lights. One older woman finally muttered, but it's a marina now," and the sheer disbelief in her voice made me laugh quietly. Yes, it was a marina, my marina, and the rules conveniently couldn't touch it. I walked along the dock, checking each boat, adjusting a rope here, straightening a light there. Every small movement reinforced the message. This space was mine, curated by me and fully functional. And the look on the HOA's faces, priceless. Confusion, frustration, and maybe even a hint of awe. "Honestly," I said finally, "I think you all overestimated your authority. This dock has been in my care longer than most of these bylaws have existed. I've maintained it, improved it, and now," I paused, gesturing to the floating platform and the neatly tied boats, "it's exactly what I envisioned, and it's not hurting anyone." The president sputtered, trying to argue, but every word came out slower, less confident, as if they realized that their threats were meaningless. I could almost hear the mental gears grinding. What do we do now? I let the silence stretch, savoring the tension, knowing that the next move, if there was one, would be theirs. Meanwhile, the lake reflected the morning sun perfectly, boats gently bobbing in rhythm with the water. I felt the thrill of victory, calm but undeniable, settling into my chest. By the time I took my first step back, the HOA members were muttering to each other, trying to regroup. Their eyes still flicked nervously to the dock, as if hoping that somehow it would revert to its original, ordinary state. It wouldn't, not now, not ever. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Sometimes, confrontation isn't about yelling legal threats or showing off authority. Sometimes it's about preparation, creativity, and execution. By the time the HOA caught up, the story had already been written, and I was holding the pen. The dock wasn't just a dock anymore. It was my statement, my victory, and my private marina. And the HOA, well, they were about to learn that rules mean very little when faced with someone who knows them better than anyone else. By mid-morning, the HOA members had moved from confused to desperate. I could see it in their faces, the flustered frowns, the whispered arguments, the frantic flipping of bylaws as if the answers were hidden somewhere between the fine print and the wallpaper. And that's when I realized the fun was really beginning. I strolled along the dock, coffee in hand, glancing at the neatly tied boats and floating platform, and couldn't help but let a small, satisfied smile creep onto my face. Every detail, the coiled ropes, the lights reflecting softly on the water, the "Welcome to my Marina" sign, had been designed not only to improve the dock but to assert ownership in a way that the HOA couldn't argue with, not without looking utterly ridiculous. The president finally approached, their clipboard shaking slightly. You can't just do this," they stammered, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "This dock is community property, you need our permission for." I held up a hand, smiling politely. Actually, I did check the bylaws. I could feel their eyes widen. "Did you know that long-term maintenance and use of a dock can confer certain rights? It's in Section 4, Paragraph 2, Line 11. I've been maintaining this dock for over 20 years. I've invested my own money, labor, and time. By your own rules, I am allowed to make improvements and maintain exclusive access, within reason, of course." They blinked and then blinked again. One of the younger board members muttered under their breath, "Wait, that can't be right." Oh, but it was, and the best part? I could see the realization dawning on them, slow and painful, like watching someone step into a puddle they didn't notice. The rules, which they had thought were absolute, were suddenly working against them. Their authority was evaporating before my eyes, all because I had done my homework while they relied on fear and signage. I started walking along the edge of the dock, gesturing to the floating platform and the row of neatly tied boats. "I even added a small platform here," I said casually, "to accommodate more boats, all fully compliant. Your bylaws never specifically prohibit extensions like this as long as they're maintained properly, which I do every season." The president opened their mouth, then shut it again. I could practically see the gears turning, their minds scrambling to find a clause that would give them the upper hand. There wasn't one. I had read every line, anticipated every possible argument, and left nothing to chance. I let the silence stretch, knowing that the tension was building. This was no longer about signs or petty rules. It was about realizing that preparation, creativity, and knowledge of the law could outmatch authority every time. And oh, the humor of it all. The HOA members, standing there with their clipboards and stern faces, looked like schoolchildren caught in a prank they didn't even understand yet. I leaned casually against the railing, sipping my coffee, and added, "Honestly, I'm surprised you didn't check the bylaws before posting those signs, but I guess oversight happens sometimes." My tone was light, almost joking, but the point landed hard. They had underestimated me. They had assumed intimidation would work, that bureaucracy alone would bend me to their will. The younger board member finally asked, hesitantly, "So, you're saying we can't make you take the dock back?" I shrugged. "Well, you could try. But according to Section 4, Paragraph 3, Line 7, any attempt to restrict access without a formal vote or without a legal challenge backed by documented ownership is ineffective. Basically, your signs don't hold any real authority over me." The disbelief on their faces was priceless. The president's jaw tightened, and I knew they were trying to calculate how to save face, how to claim some semblance of victory. But the dock was already mine, legally, practically, and visually. Every rope, plank, and buoy had cemented my claim. I walked to the center of the dock, looking at the water shimmering in the morning light. "This dock," I said softly, almost to myself, "was always mine, but now it's also my statement. And your signs, well," I gestured at the bright orange notices, now almost comically small against the marina I had built. "They're just decorations." A tense silence followed, punctuated only by the gentle lapping of water against the dock. I could see them trying to process, to regroup, to figure out how to respond, but there was nothing to be done. I had anticipated every move, every argument, every clause. The law and my creativity had combined to give me complete control. And as I looked at the boats bobbing gently, the lights twinkling faintly, and the floating platform solid and functional, I realized the truth. Sometimes the best victory doesn't come from confrontation, yelling, or threats. It comes from knowing the rules, preparing carefully, and executing a plan so cleverly that your opposition can only watch in stunned silence. The dock was mine, fully, and the HOA, well, they were about to learn that knowledge, preparation, and audacity could turn their authority into nothing more than a minor inconvenience. A week had passed since my midnight operation, and in that time the dock had quietly become the talk of the neighborhood. Whispers floated through the HOA meetings, snippets of disbelief and frustration shared over coffee and small talk. I, however, had something even better than whispers. I had a fully functional, fully private marina ready for its grand debut. I woke early that Saturday, the excitement buzzing through me like electricity. Today wasn't just about enjoying the dock, it was about celebrating it. I wanted neighbors, friends, and even the curious onlookers to see the transformation in all its glory. I had made small invitations. Casual, no formal announcement, just enough people to appreciate the work, laugh at the irony, and experience the dock the way it was meant to be. By mid-morning, people started arriving. Kayaks, canoes, and small boats were pulled up to the shore, neighbors helping each other with ropes and paddles. Everyone was laughing, joking, and marveling at the transformation. I strolled along the dock, welcoming guests, adjusting ropes, straightening lights, and feeling a quiet pride in every detail. It wasn't just a dock anymore, it was a statement of creativity, preparation, and good old-fashioned audacity. And then I saw them, the HOA. A small contingent had arrived, led by the president, clipboard in hand, and expressions that mixed outrage, confusion, and maybe even a little embarrassment. They had expected a simple, enforceable members-only situation. Instead, they were greeted by boats, lights, a floating platform, and neighbors clearly enjoying what I had created. I walked up to them casually, coffee in hand, and gestured toward the dock. "Welcome," I said lightly. "I hope you like the improvements." The president sputtered, words catching in their throat. You can't. These are community property bylaws. You don't have the right to." I smiled. "Actually, I do. I've maintained this dock for decades, made all improvements myself, and followed the rules laid out in Section 4 of the bylaws. Legally speaking, this marina is fully compliant." Their jaw tightened, eyes darting between the boats, the floating platform, and the neatly coiled ropes. I could practically see the mental calculations going on. How do we enforce anything now? How do we reclaim authority without looking ridiculous? I decided to add a little theater. I grabbed a small ribbon I had tied to the end of the dock and held it up. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced with mock ceremony, "I hereby declare the official opening of my private marina." I cut the ribbon with a small pair of scissors, and the neighbors erupted into laughter and applause. It was glorious. People wandered along the dock, touching the ropes, stepping onto the floating platform, and taking photos with the boats. Children splashed in the shallows, adults sipped coffee and chatted, and somewhere behind me, I could hear the frustrated muttering of the HOA president. I walked past them casual as a Sunday morning and said, I even left your members-only signs up. They make a nice decorative touch." The subtle jab made them flush red, and I felt a warm sense of satisfaction. Their attempts at authority were now nothing more than props in a scene they had no control over. Neighbors were commenting on how the dock felt more welcoming than ever, the marina lights casting a gentle glow on the water and the boats perfectly aligned along the sides. I could see the HOA members trying to blend into the background, hoping no one would notice their presence. Too late, the dock had already spoken for itself. As the day wore on, the marina was alive with laughter, conversation, and small adventures. Canoes glided across the water, kayaks rocked gently with their occupants, and the floating platform was used for everything from sunbathing to impromptu fishing. I walked along the dock, occasionally adjusting ropes or straightening a buoy, smiling at the chaos I had turned into a carefully orchestrated scene. And in the back of my mind, I knew the best part wasn't just the dock itself, it was the lesson. Sometimes, authority and rules only go as far as the imagination and preparation behind them, and when those collide, the result is not just a victory, it's a spectacle. By sunset, the marina was quiet, boats bobbing gently, lights reflecting off the water. The neighbors had gone home, still talking about what they had witnessed, still laughing at the irony, and I, leaning against the railing with a cold drink in hand, took it all in. The dock was no longer just mine, it was a symbol, a story, and a triumph. The HOA could post all the members-only signs they wanted, they could scramble, complain, or even hold meetings. But by now it didn't matter. The dock had become untouchable, a testament to preparation, creativity, and a little midnight mischief. And as the final light of the day glinted across the water, I knew one thing for certain. This marina was mine, completely and irrevocably, and the HOA had no choice but to watch in stunned silence. The next morning, the lake was calm again, sparkling under a sun that seemed to shine just a little brighter on my dock. The night's festivities had faded into memory, but the result remained. My dock had become a fully functional private marina, complete with boats, lights, and that floating platform I had added. Every rope was coiled, every buoy in place, every detail screaming ownership, and the HOA had no words for it. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and took a deep breath. There's something magical about standing on a dock that you built, transformed, and claimed. It wasn't just about the wood, water, or boats. It was about the journey, the planning, the midnight hours spent quietly asserting control in a world that often feels obsessed with rules. And most importantly, it was about winning in a way that left everyone else completely bewildered. The HOA arrived later than usual, probably expecting me to have removed the marina overnight, as if sheer force of intimidation could undo creativity and preparation. I watched them approach from a distance, clipboards shaking, whispers bouncing among the group like nervous birds. "Members only," the president muttered, pointing at the floating platform. We need to." I raised a hand, stopping them mid-complaint. "Actually," I said casually, "all improvements were made fully within the bylaws. You might want to double-check Section 4 again." I could see the instant flicker of realization in their eyes, followed by the sinking feeling of defeat. I walked along the dock, adjusting a rope here, straightening a light there, enjoying the uncomfortable silence radiating from them. The neighbors who had arrived early to admire the marina were laughing quietly at the spectacle. Some waved, others whispered congratulations. The contrast was delicious, me calm and victorious, the HOA flustered and powerless. I decided to add a little flourish for dramatic effect. Pulling out a small bottle of sparkling cider I had stashed in my cooler, I tapped the top against the dock post. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced with mock ceremony, "may I present to you the official, fully operational, legally compliant private marina of your name." The neighbors cheered. The HOA muttered. I smiled, letting the moment sink in. Every rope, every plank, every solar light I had painstakingly installed over the last week was now a testament to patience, preparation, and a little audacious humor. And then came the moment of truths. The president took a step forward, frowning, trying to assert some authority. You can't, Will." I raised my coffee mug. "Actually, I already did, and the rules are on my side." I gestured to the neatly tied boats, the floating platform, the perfectly coiled ropes, and the welcoming signs swinging gently in the breeze. "It's all here, compliant, maintained, and clearly marked. You might want to take notes." I could see their frustration mounting, their minds grasping at straws. There was no anger, no yelling from me, just calm, quiet confidence. Because that's the point of preparation, it removes the need for confrontation. They couldn't argue with the docks, the boats, or the bylaws. And they couldn't argue with the neighbors who had been watching, laughing, and enjoying the marina without a hint of restriction. As the day went on, the HOA members eventually wandered off, muttering about meetings, rules, and procedures, but they didn't return. I leaned against the railing, watching the sunlight glint off the water, listening to the gentle rocking of the boats, and realized that the victory wasn't just in reclaiming the dock. It was in asserting creativity and patience over bureaucracy. Neighbors came and went throughout the day, paddling in kayaks, fishing from the floating platform, or simply enjoying the view. I wandered along the dock, checking the ropes and adjusting the lights, feeling a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. The marina wasn't just a physical space anymore. It was a symbol, a story, and a quiet reminder that rules are only as powerful as the people who understand them. By evening, I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, standing at the edge of the dock. The sun dipped low, casting a warm glow over the water. The boats bobbed gently, the lights reflected off the ripples, and everything was exactly as it should be. My dock had become untouchable, unassailable, and undeniably mine. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew the HOA would continue to fuss, to mutter, to try to assert control in whatever small ways they could. But it didn't matter. The dock, the marina, and the story I had created were beyond them. The victory was complete. I lifted my mug in a quiet toast to the lake, to creativity, and to audacity. "Here, to doing it your way," I murmured. And with that, I sat down, the water shimmering before me, laughter echoing from the neighbors, and a profound sense of satisfaction settling in my chest. The dock was mine, my marina was real, and the HOA, well, they had just learned a lesson they wouldn't forget anytime soon. Victory never tasted so sweet. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.